When my wife snapped, "You're sleeping in the guest room until you apologize," I felt something in me shift, almost like a switch flipping after years of swallowing my pride and taking the blame just to keep the peace. You've got to understand, this wasn't some massive betrayal or dramatic fight about infidelity, finances, or family. It started with almond milk, of all things. I'd just come home from a 12-hour shift, exhausted, shoes still muddy from the job site, and she asked if I'd remembered to grab her almond milk. I hadn't, and the way she reacted, you'd think I'd crashed the car or gambled away our savings. She threw her hands up, accused me of never listening, and launched into a speech about how she was tired of being invisible in her own marriage. Normally, I would have sighed, apologized, and promised to do better next time. But this time, I just stood there, staring at her, realizing how many times I'd apologize for things as small as forgetting to put a plate in the dishwasher or leaving the bathroom light on. Over the years, apologies had become a kind of currency in our marriage. My currency, not hers. She never apologized, not once, even when she was dead wrong. She'd say things like, "That's just how I am," or, "I don't mean it," and I'd let it slide because I didn't want to escalate. But when she pointed at the guest room and declared it my new sleeping quarters until I made things right, something in me cracked. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, I just said, "Fine, I'll enjoy the peace and quiet." For the first time, her face registered surprise. It was like she expected me to growl instantly, to beg to come back into our shared bed like a dog waiting for scraps. Instead, I walked down the hall, grabbed a pillow, and shut the guest room door behind me, half expecting her to storm in demanding I reconsider, but she didn't. The guest room was cold and smelled faintly of old boxes, but as I lay there scrolling on my phone, something strange happened. I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. No icy silence next to me, no sighs of disapproval, no sharp elbow in my ribs when I snored, just me, four walls, and the quiet. I ended up on Reddit, reading through r/relationships and r/am I the asshole posts from other guys describing eerily similar cycles, wives or girlfriends who weaponized apologies, who created battles out of minor inconveniences, who thrived on the imbalance. It was like looking into a mirror, and for once I didn't feel crazy. I realized I'd been playing a game all along, one where she set the rules and I was always a step behind, trying not to lose. That first night in the guest room, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, she breezed past me in the kitchen without a word, slamming cabinets louder than usual, and I just sipped my coffee. I didn't chase her down, didn't offer up a half-hearted, "I'm sorry," didn't play into her drama. At work, I found myself oddly lighter, like I'd shed a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. By the third day, I brought my Xbox into the guest room, set up my own little corner, and started calling it the man cave in my head. When she sneered, "Looks like you're settling in," I smiled and said, "Yeah, it's not so bad." That pissed her off more than any argument could have. She wanted me uncomfortable, desperate to return to her side. But I was discovering I liked the independence, the space to breathe. Friends at work joked that I'd lucked out, that plenty of married guys would kill for their own room. And though I laughed it off, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe they were right. The deeper truth hit me late one night, lying in the guest bed staring at the ceiling. Our marriage had turned into a cold war, a constant tug of war where she demanded control and I surrendered bit by bit. And for the first time, I wasn't surrendering. I wasn't sure what it meant yet. Was this the beginning of the end or the start of a reset? But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to apologize for almond milk, and I wasn't going to crawl back just because she told me to. The silence between us grew heavier, meals eaten separately, text reduced to one-word answers. But instead of feeling miserable, I felt a strange spark of defiance, like I'd rediscovered a part of myself I thought had disappeared years ago.
3 nights turned into a full week, and by then, the guest room no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like liberation, like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. I had carried my Xbox into the room, hooked it up to the little TV on the dresser, and even ordered a mini fridge off Amazon so I didn't have to wander into the kitchen every time I wanted a drink. My wife scoffed when she saw the delivery guy drop the box at the door. "Really? You're turning the guest room into your dorm room?" But I just shrugged and wheeled it inside. Instead of deterring me, her disdain only made me dig in further. I stocked it with soda, leftover pizza, even a few beers. And suddenly, nights that used to feel like tiptoeing through landmines felt like bachelor-era evenings of peace, freedom, and laughter. My buddies on Xbox Live couldn't believe it when I told them the situation. One said, "Dude, you're living the dream. You've got your own space and you're married? Don't screw this up." It was meant as a joke, but the truth of it gnawed at me. Why did it feel like I had to screw something up just to find happiness in my own marriage? Meanwhile, my wife escalated her tactics, thinking the silent treatment or dramatic sighs would force me to crack. She'd cook dinner for herself and plate nothing for me, as if I'd starve or come crawling back. Instead, I swung by Chipotle on the way home, grabbed burritos, and ate in my cave while watching football. She started making little digs. "Must be nice ignoring your responsibilities in your little man cave." Or, "I guess you really don't care about this marriage if you can live like that." But what stunned me was how little those barbs hurt now. A month ago, I would have twisted myself into knots trying to reassure her, but something had changed. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of being exiled over almond milk, or maybe I'd just grown tired of being the only one bending. But I realized I wasn't afraid of her anger anymore. And with that realization came a kind of clarity. I started replaying our marriage in my head like a highlight reel, not of love and laughter, but of all the times I had apologized when I wasn't wrong. All the birthdays she'd dismissed my gifts as not thoughtful enough. All the weekends hijacked by plans with her friends I never enjoyed. All the little criticisms that chipped away at my confidence. For years, I thought this was just what marriage looked like: compromise, sacrifice, patience. But reading more threads on Reddit, hearing from strangers across the country, I saw patterns I couldn't ignore. This wasn't normal compromise. This was control. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a subject, someone to manage and correct. And I had played along because it was easier than fighting. But living in the guest room gave me a taste of something I hadn't felt in years: autonomy. That taste made me hungry. Hungry for respect, for balance, for a voice in my own life. I didn't announce it to her, but inside I decided something. I wouldn't apologize just to end the silence. If she wanted to talk, if she wanted to address the real issues, fine, I was open. But I wouldn't say sorry just to reset the clock until the next blow-up. That week, I found myself smiling at work more, joking with coworkers, even hitting the gym again. It was like shaking off years of dust. My boss asked if something good had happened, and I laughed, telling him he wouldn't believe me if I explained. At home, my wife was clearly unsettled. She'd stand in the hallway at night, looking at the closed guest room door, and I could almost feel her confusion radiating through the wood. She wasn't used to me not breaking. She wasn't used to her punishments not working. Once I overheard her on the phone with her sister, whispering, "He's acting like he likes it in there. I don't get it." And she was right. I did like it. That scared her more than anything. Because if I didn't need to crawl back, then what power did she really have? By the second week, the distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a canyon growing wider by the day. She tried to bait me with comments like, maybe I should get used to having the whole bed to myself, or other men actually want to share a room with their wife. But I stayed calm, sipping my beer or scrolling my phone, replying with, maybe you should. For once, she was the one squirming. And though I didn't know where this experiment would lead, toward reconciliation or toward the collapse of everything we'd built, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to being the man who apologized for almond milk, and I wasn't going to surrender the peace I'd finally found in 4 plain walls and a humming mini-fridge.
By the third week, what started as a petty exile over almond milk had snowballed into something far bigger. And I could tell my wife was spiraling because the playbook she'd always relied on, control, guilt, the expectation that I'd eventually fold, wasn't working anymore. And that terrified her. She started trying new tactics, the kind that veered from passive-aggressive to manipulative in record time. One night, she came into the guest room with a plate of cookies, all sweet smiles, pretending like nothing had ever happened. But when I asked if she was ready to talk about what actually started this whole mess, her face hardened instantly and she snapped, "So you really are enjoying this separation, huh?" before storming off. Another night, she showed up in lingerie, something she hadn't done in years, and tried to seduce me back into the master bedroom.
But I didn't cave. I told her physical intimacy couldn't be used as currency to avoid accountability. And she looked at me like I'd grown a second head. By then, I'd done more than just scroll Reddit. I'd been reflecting, journaling, even talking to a therapist my buddy recommended. And for the first time, I had words for what was happening. Emotional manipulation, stonewalling, weaponized silence. My therapist asked me one question that stuck. When was the last time you felt like an equal in your marriage? And I couldn't answer, because deep down, I knew the truth. It had been years, maybe since before the wedding. That realization hit me harder than any fight. I started noticing the subtle power imbalance in everything, how she made all the big decisions, vacations, purchases, even what shows we watched, while my role was to agree and adapt. How she never once apologized, even for harsh insults, because she believed it would make her look weak. How I had been conditioned to see conflict as my fault, even when it wasn't. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The guest room became more than a physical space. It became a metaphor for the emotional distance I desperately needed. I was sleeping better, eating better, laughing more, and even reconnecting with old friends I hadn't seen in years, because she used to complain whenever I spent time away from her. My wife noticed, and instead of reflecting, she lashed out. "You act like you're happier without me," she spat one morning. And for the first time, I didn't deny it. I just said, I am happier without this constant drama. The silence that followed was deafening. That day, she texted me paragraphs about how ungrateful I was, how she sacrificed so much for me, how no woman would put up with me the way she did. And I realized her narrative was cracked. She saw herself as the martyr and me as the problem, but I wasn't buying it anymore. Later that week, we sat down at the kitchen table, the first real conversation in weeks, and I told her calmly, this isn't about almond milk. It's about how I've been living in a marriage where apologies are a leash, and I'm done with it. She rolled her eyes, accused me of reading too much internet garbage, but I didn't raise my voice. I just repeated, I'm done apologizing for existing. That phrase seemed to shake her, but instead of admitting fault, she went on the offensive, saying, well, maybe we should just call it quits if you're so miserable. The thing is, she expected me to panic, to beg her not to leave, but I just looked at her and said, maybe we should. For the first time, the power shifted, and she didn't know what to do with it. She stared at me like I was a stranger. That night, she didn't yell, didn't slam doors. She just sat quietly on her side of the bed while I closed the door to my guest room, and I realized something had broken, maybe permanently. But instead of feeling dread, I felt relief. I wasn't scared of the end anymore. I was scared of going back to the way things were. And once you cross that line, there's no one crossing it.
The fourth week felt like the end of a season, like we'd been running a marathon of silence, tension, and cold standoffs. And somewhere along the way, I stopped hoping she would meet me halfway and started realizing I didn't need her to. It all came to a head one Friday night when she stood in the doorway of the guest room, arms crossed, and said in a flat voice, "So are you just never coming back? Is this how you want our marriage to end?" I paused my game, looked at her, and for once didn't feel the familiar knot of guilt in my chest. I felt clarity. I told her, what I want is a marriage where we both respect each other, where apologies aren't weapons, where I don't feel like a kid being sent to the corner every time you're mad. But if that's impossible with you, then yeah, maybe this is how it ends. She blinked, genuinely stunned, and for the first time in years, she had no comeback. She muttered something about me throwing everything away and stormed out, but I didn't chase her. That weekend, I packed a bag and went to stay at my buddy Mark's place, because I needed to see what it felt like to live outside the shadow of constant conflict. And you know what? It felt incredible. We grilled steaks, watched the game, cracked beers, and I laughed harder than I had in months.
I even slept like a rock on his lumpy couch, because peace of mind beats a king-size bed with resentment any day. When I came back Sunday night, my wife was waiting, mascara smeared like she'd been crying, and she said, "I don't want to lose you." For a second, old instincts kicked in, the urge to fold, to hug her, to promise I'd do better. But then I remembered the therapist's words, "If nothing changes, nothing changes." So I said, "If you don't want to lose me, then you need to start treating me like a partner, not a punching bag. That means apologizing when you're wrong, respecting my time, and actually listening. If you can't do that, then maybe we both deserve different lives." She cried, swore she could change, but I'd heard promises before, so I told her actions mattered more than words. Over the next few days, she tried. Small things like saying thank you when I did chores, apologizing once when she snapped about a dirty dish. But it felt awkward, like she was reading lines from a script she didn't believe in. And deep down, I knew the truth. Even if she could fake it for a while, the pattern was carved too deep. By the end of that month, I moved more of my stuff into the guest room permanently, and we had the real talk, the kind where you both know the finish line is in sight. I told her I wanted separation, maybe even divorce, because I wasn't willing to spend the rest of my life begging for scraps of respect. She cried, threatened, begged, accused me of giving up, but I stayed calm. For once, I wasn't bending. A few weeks later, I signed a lease on a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, one of which I set up as my new gaming cave, with the same mini fridge humming in the corner. And on the first night I slept there alone, I felt more at peace than I had in years. Looking back, I realized the guest room was never punishment. It was a preview of freedom, of what life could be without constant eggshells and forced apologies. If she ever reads this, I hope she understands I didn't walk away because of almond milk. I walked away because the guest room showed me I'd rather live alone in a small, quiet space than share a king-size bed with someone who couldn't see my worth. And maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes being sent to the guest room is the wake-up call you didn't know you needed to stop apologizing for everything and start living for yourself.